Hi everyone, I'm going to talk about planting BareRoot roses. It's BareRoot rose and fruit tree season, which is January through about mid-March. You know it when you go to a nursery and you see all the BareRoot roses and fruit trees. Planting BareRoot's a good idea because the plants are basically just not growing. So when you plant it this time of year, as soon as the soil temperatures warm up, they're going to start producing roots. Also, more importantly, I feel, is that the selection of roses and fruit trees is greater this time of year in BareRoot season. One thing is if you have heavy clay soils or bad draining soils, I would avoid planting BareRoot. I think what happens is when you plant the BareRoot and those little fine roots start growing, if we have a really heavy rain and your soil's not draining, those little roots just sort of rot out. If you plant a already established rose, they do better, in my opinion, in a heavier clay soil. Of course, ideally, you would plant a rose in really good draining soil. Of course, they need full sun, at least 6 hours of sun. So BareRoot, they come in a few different packaging. Some of them have no packaging. You'll just find them in a nursery in sort of sawdust or sand, and sometimes you're able to pull them out and inspect the roots of the plant. That works. Other times they're just wrapped in sawdust and in a bag. You want to be careful with those. If you don't plant them right away, put them in an area where the rain won't get to them, because those bags can fill up with water and rot out the roots. Lately, I've been finding them, a BareRoot rose, in these peat pots, with the idea being that you just plant the whole entire pot. And this works well if you can't get to it right away and it starts growing out of dormancy. You could just plant the peat pot, and the idea is that the peat pot will break down. Now, I'm not really into trusting that 100%, even though my experience is that for sure they do break down. I'm just going to open this up and show you. So here's the peat pot. It's like Christmas. So what I would do if you were just going to plant this is I would, of course, if you can, cut the bottom out, score the sides. And if you're planting it late, say going into March, then for sure, it's going to have actively growing roots, and you're going to want to avoid disturbing those roots. So planting it directly in the peat pot's okay. This time of year, early January, I've even taken them out of the peat pot to inspect the roots and planted them like a BareRoot. So either way, but I would disturb this peat pot before you put it into the ground. So those are 3 ways you'll find BareRoot at the nurseries. Now, when you buy your BareRoot and you're ready to plant, I would soak the roots overnight in lukewarm water, not freezing cold water, just sort of to rehydrate them. And so this one's soaked overnight. And then what you're going to want to do is inspect the roots and the stems as well. So this one has an obviously broken root there. So I'm just going to cut that off right there. But all the rest of the roots look pretty good. The stems, if you want to find canes that are sort of evenly distributed around, this one has sort of a nub. I'm just going to cut the nub off. That's a nub. Going to cut it off. There you go. So it's ready to go. Already sort of pre-dug a hole. Now I'm sort of cheating a little bit. This isn't a raised bed with primo, good draining potting soil. I would plant them in the ground, but if you are planting them in the ground and the ground is really wet, remember, you don't want to work wet soil. So sort of plan ahead, put some plywood over the area you're going to dig a hole, some plastic, and hopefully that'll keep it a little bit moist, or you're going to have to wait for the soil to dry a bit, because you don't want to work really wet soils. It's just not good for the soil structure. Okay, so I'm just going to move the bucket out of the way. Now, two key things is, since it forms a little like crown here, an inverted crown, you want to make sure that you have a cone in the center so those roots could sort of drape over it, right? Because if you were to just put it in and then bury it, what happens is as the soil settles and the plant settles, pretty soon your plant's going to be deeper under the soil than you want, and that could lead to rot. So you're just going to want to put a little crown So there we go, just something to drape the roots over. And you're just gonna backfill. You could add some compost at this time, but this is really good potting soil, so I don't really need to. Just gonna backfill right here. Now you just wanna plant it so the roots are buried. Now something else to keep in mind is where the graft line is at. Pretty much all roses that you're going to find are going to be grafted, meaning you have the scion, the desirable blooming part, and the rootstock. And the graft line is usually just where the canes are coming out of, sort of this bulbous area. You want to make sure that that's above ground. I've heard that in areas where it gets really cold and freezes, that you actually want to bury that graft line. That's foreign to me since it never gets that cold and roses just do just fine in zone 9. So I would be careful. I'm always careful and wary of getting too much soil by that graft line because that is sensitive to diseases and fungus. But I've planted it already. There it is. I just backfilled. In early spring, when they start growing out, I'll put some mulch around it, maybe 2 inches of mulch, not right up against the trunk. I'm going to water it in. And because I did that nice little pyramid of soil, it shouldn't move where it's at. But of course, if some roots are exposed, just go ahead and cover them back up. And that's about it. And pretty soon you'll have some beautiful, beautiful roses.